3 days of YouTube tutorials and stubborn determination could somehow transform into something worth watching. I took a breath and prepared to show 300 people exactly what contemporary dance looked like when performed by someone who had absolutely no idea what they were doing, but was committed to doing it anyway. The dance that broke all the rules. The first step I took was just a walk. Not a graceful glide across polished floors like real dancers do, but an actual walk. Step by step, like I was heading to the grocery store instead of expressing some deep artistic vision. The audience wasn't sure what to make of it. I could feel their confusion radiating from the seats like heat from pavement. Then I started my step-touch combination. Right foot steps to the side. Left foot follows. Repeat. The same basic movement every beginner learns, except I was doing it with the kind of focus usually reserved for diffusing bombs. Each step was deliberate, intentional, like I was claiming every square inch of that stage through sheer determination rather than skill. My arms came up in what the YouTube tutorial had called an expressive reach. In reality, it looked like I was trying to hug the air, or possibly surrender to invisible police officers. But I committed to it completely. Sold every awkward angle like it was exactly what I'd planned. The audience started leaning forward in their seats. Not because the movement was beautiful, but because my conviction was impossible to ignore. Traditional dance relies on technique, precise positioning, years of training that teach your body to move in ways that defy gravity and common sense. I had none of that. What I had was 3 days of bedroom practice and a stubborn refusal to apologize for being exactly who I was. Turns out that combination is more entertaining than anyone expected. The first real crowd reaction came when I attempted my signature slow spin. I'd practiced this move hundreds of times, but the stage floor was more slippery than my bedroom carpet. Instead of a controlled turn, I got something that looked like a washing machine in slow motion. My arms windmilled slightly to maintain balance while my face showed genuine surprise at the physics involved. The audience laughed. Not cruel laughter, but delighted laughter. The kind that says they're enjoying the ride instead of judging the driver. Someone near the back actually clapped. Just 3 quick claps, but it felt like validation. My internal monologue kicked into overdrive. Okay, that worked. Whatever that was, it worked. Keep doing things that work. I moved into my floor work sequence, which was supposed to involve gracefully lowering myself to the ground. Instead, it became an elaborate negotiation between my body and gravity. I ended up in a position that was part sitting, part crouching, with my arms extended like I was presenting something important to the audience. Maybe my dignity. Maybe my complete lack of shame. Either way, they seemed to appreciate the gesture. Getting back up was even more interesting. I'd never figured out how to make rising from the floor look elegant, so I just made it look determined. Pushed myself up with visible effort and brushed off my clothes like I'd accomplished something significant. The audience was fully engaged now. Phones were out, but not to mock me. They were recording something they'd never seen before. The energy in the room shifted from polite attention to active participation. People weren't just watching my performance, they were rooting for it. I could hear whispered encouragement from the front rows. Someone's mom said, "Oh honey," in a voice that sounded proud instead of pitying. A group of 8th graders started clapping along to my music, which was both helpful and terrifying. My running commentary kept me grounded while chaos unfolded around me. Okay, that step worked. This turn feels wrong, but commit to it anyway. Smile like you meant to do that. The audience can't hear your thoughts, so make your face tell the story you want them to believe. Act like someone who belongs here, and maybe they'll believe it too. I could see the exact moment when even the skeptical audience members surrendered to what was happening. It was during my interpretive arm sequence where I basically conducted an invisible orchestra while walking in a large circle. The movement made no sense from a technical standpoint, but it looked like I was having the time of my life. Joy is contagious that way. When someone is genuinely happy to be doing something ridiculous, it makes everyone else want to be happy too. My sister sat in the 4th row with her mouth slightly open. Not in horror, but in amazement. Like she was watching someone she'd never met before. Which, in a way, she was. The person on stage wasn't the quiet girl who hid in her bedroom. This was someone who took up space without apologizing for it. Someone who turned awkwardness into art through sheer force of personality. The finale involved all my signature moves combined into what I generously called a routine. Step touch across the stage, expressive arm gestures toward the ceiling, the slow spin that had become my trademark, a dramatic floor moment followed by a determined rise. Each element was exactly as awkward as it had been individually, but somehow the combination created something that was more than the sum of its parts. I ended with my arms raised above my head in what looked like victory. Not because I'd executed perfect technique, but because I'd survived 3 minutes of being completely myself in front of 300 people. The pose was equal parts triumphant and exhausted. Like I'd just finished running a marathon that happened to involve interpretive movement. My authentic joy in movement had become infectious throughout the auditorium. People were smiling, not at me, but with me. They got the joke even though it wasn't really a joke. They understood that passion could be more entertaining than perfection. That commitment to being yourself was worth more than years of technical training. Standing there in the stage lights, I realized something important. Technique gets you respect, but authenticity gets you connection. People don't remember the dancers who moved perfectly. They remember the ones who moved like they meant it. And I had definitely meant every awkward, the unexpected standing ovation. The sound hit me like a physical force. Not polite golf clapping or scattered applause teachers have to encourage. Real applause. Enthusiastic applause. The kind that starts with a few people and spreads through the auditorium like wildfire until everyone is clapping because they genuinely want to clap. I stood there in the stage lights, trying to process what was happening. People were standing up. Not just my parents, who were obligated to support me, or Mrs. Chen, who had to pretend every performance was wonderful. Random classmates I barely knew were getting out of their seats and clapping like I'd just accomplished something extraordinary. My brain kept trying to find the mistake, the misunderstanding that would explain why 300 people were cheering for someone who just spent 3 minutes doing basic movements with questionable technique. Success feels different when you weren't expecting it. When you prepare for disaster and get triumph, instead, your emotional system doesn't know how to process the information. I'd spent the entire week bracing for humiliation, planning how I'd handle the inevitable mockery, figuring out which route to take to my locker afterward to avoid the worst of the gossip. I had no mental framework for what to do when people actually liked what they'd seen. The applause kept going. Someone near the back started whooping. A group of 6th graders began chanting my name like I was a rock star instead of someone who learned to dance from YouTube tutorials. The judges were clapping too, which seemed like it might be against some kind of professional code, but they didn't seem to care about maintaining objectivity anymore. I found Mia in the 4th row. She was on her feet, clapping harder than anyone else, with tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears or embarrassed tears, but proud tears. The kind that come when you realize you've witnessed something special, even if you can't quite explain what made it special. Her expression was pure amazement mixed with something that looked like respect. She was seeing her quiet sister as someone completely different for the first time. My parents looked shocked in the best possible way. Dad had stopped recording because he was too busy applauding to hold his phone steady. Mom had her hand over her mouth like she couldn't believe what she was watching. They'd expected to sit through a well-intentioned disaster and instead got to watch their daughter discover something powerful about herself. The standing ovation lasted longer than my actual performance. Mrs. Chen had to wave her hands to get people to sit down so the show could continue. Even then, scattered applause kept breaking out like aftershocks from an earthquake. People were talking excitedly to each other instead of settling into quiet attention for the next act. The energy in the room had shifted permanently. Middle school social dynamics can change faster than weather patterns. One day you're invisible, and the next day, everyone knows your name. But usually those changes happen because of gossip or drama or someone doing something spectacularly stupid. I'd managed to shift my social position by doing something spectacularly authentic instead. Backstage was chaos in the best possible way. Kids I'd never spoken to were lining up to talk to me. Ashley Kim grabbed my hands and said, "That was the coolest thing I've ever seen at one of these shows." Marcus Chen wanted to know if I was planning to audition for the spring musical. Sarah Martinez asked if I gave dance lessons, which was hilarious considering I'd started learning 3 days ago. Jessica Wong, the violin player, told me she'd been terrified to perform after my act because she knew nothing could top it. "You made everyone realize that being perfect isn't the point," she said. "You made it okay to just be human up there." Coming from someone with actual musical talent, that compliment meant more than she probably realized. The requests for friendship came fast and steady. Kids who'd never noticed me before suddenly wanted to sit with me at lunch, to partner with me on projects, to include me in conversations I'd always observed from the outside. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Like I'd accidentally unlocked a social level I hadn't known existed. David Park asked if I wanted to join the drama club. "We need people who aren't afraid to look ridiculous," he said. "Most actors are too worried about being cool to really commit to a performance." The irony that my complete lack of coolness had somehow made me cool wasn't lost on me. Even the 8th graders were approaching me with something approaching respect. In middle school hierarchy, having older students acknowledge your existence is like receiving a presidential commendation. They treated me like I'd done something brave instead of something desperate. Like choosing to be authentically myself had required courage instead of just stubbornness. Standing there surrounded by classmates who suddenly saw me as someone worth knowing, I realized something important. I discovered that I was capable of things I'd never imagined. Not just performing in front of people, but commanding their attention through sheer force of personality, making them laugh with me instead of at me, turning my greatest weakness into my greatest strength. Mrs. Chen announced the next performer, and gradually people filtered back to their seats. But the energy remained different, expectant, like everyone was hoping the next act would be equally willing to break the rules about what performances were supposed to look like. I'd accidentally raised the bar not for technical skill, but for authentic connection. Walking toward the exit, I caught one last glimpse of the stage where I'd just experienced the most terrifying and rewarding 3 minutes of my life. The lights were still bright. The floor was still slippery. But somehow, the space felt less intimidating now. Like I'd claimed it as my own through sheer determination to be exactly who I was. What I didn't realize in that moment was how much this single performance would change everything that came after. How Mia's cruel joke would become the foundation for a completely different version of myself. The aftermath, when pranks become gifts. 2 weeks later, I was still processing what had actually happened on that stage. The immediate aftermath was surreal in ways I hadn't expected. Monday morning, I walked into school bracing for the usual invisibility and instead got nods of recognition from kids I'd never spoken to. Not the kind of attention that comes from doing something embarrassing, but the kind that comes from doing something memorable. People remembered my name now. They had opinions about my performance. I'd gone from background character to someone worth discussing. My social standing had shifted in ways that defied middle school logic. Usually, popularity comes from being good at things everyone values. Sports, looking perfect, having the right clothes. I'd gained recognition by being spectacularly imperfect at something nobody cared about. But authenticity creates its own currency. People respond to someone who's genuinely themselves, even when themselves is awkward and unpracticed. My relationship with Mia changed overnight. The Cold War between us melted into something that resembled actual sisterhood. She'd seen me succeed at something she'd set up as my failure, and the experience had shifted how she saw me. I wasn't her weak little sister anymore. I was someone who could take her worst shot and turn it into something powerful. Our conversations became actual conversations instead of carefully constructed battles. She admitted she'd been jealous of how easily I could disappear when things got difficult, how I never seemed to care what other people thought. She'd mistaken my invisibility for confidence and had been trying to knock me down to her level of insecurity. Instead, she'd accidentally lifted me up to a level of confidence I'd never imagined reaching. "I thought you'd hate me forever after what I did," she said one night while we were both doing homework at the kitchen table. "But you turned it into something amazing. I don't know how you did that." "I didn't turn it into anything," I told her. "I just decided not to let it break me." She looked at me like I'd revealed some secret about the universe. Like refusing to be a victim was a superpower she'd never considered. Maybe for someone who'd spent years defining herself through other people's reactions, it was exactly that revolutionary. My newfound confidence spread to other areas faster than I'd expected. I raised my hand in English class to answer a question about symbolism, joined a conversation at lunch instead of just listening from the sidelines, volunteered to present my science project instead of hoping the teacher would skip over me. Small acts of bravery that would have been impossible a month earlier. The performance had taught me something crucial about fear. It never goes away completely, but it stops controlling you when you prove to yourself that you can act despite it. I was still nervous about speaking up in class, but I did it anyway. Still anxious about joining conversations, but I joined them anyway. The fear became background noise instead of the main soundtrack. Teachers started noticing me in ways they never had before. Mr. Rodriguez asked if I'd considered joining academic decathlon. Mrs. Chen suggested I audition for a speaking role in the spring play. Miss Patterson recommended me for the peer tutoring program. Suddenly, I was someone who got considered for opportunities instead of someone who got overlooked. Middle school social hierarchies are more fragile than anyone wants to admit. The invisible barriers between groups dissolve the moment someone does something unexpected. I'd crossed from the invisible kids to the interesting kids without changing anything about myself except my willingness to be seen. The categories that seemed so permanent were actually just suggestions everyone had agreed to follow.